The wind screamed across the frozen wasteland like a living thing. David Reed pressed his face shield closer, ice already forming on the edges despite the heating elements. His thermal scanner beeped insistently, displaying patterns that made no sense. Organic signatures, multiple, massive, and failing. He should turn back. Protocol demanded it. The outpost needed him, and Thyra's Seven's winter storms killed anything caught outside within hours. But those signals kept pulsing, rhythmic and desperate, like a heartbeat calling across the ice. David had been alone on this frozen moon for 8 months, maintaining atmospheric processors and cataloging local microorganisms. Exciting work, his supervisors called it. Lonely work, reality proved. The kind of assignment given to scientists who asked too many uncomfortable questions about corporate mining practices. The signal strengthened. David climbed over a ridge of compressed snow, servos in his suit whining against the wind. Below, in a canyon carved by ancient glaciers, 4 shapes huddled together. His breath caught. Dragons, actual dragons. They were nothing like Earth legends, yet somehow exactly right. Scales reflected the storm's dim light in shades of deep blue and silver. Wings wrapped tight against bodies the size of cargo haulers. Elongated heads with crests that flared and flattened as they communicated in ways David's equipment could barely register. One was small, a juvenile maybe, judging by proportions. It lay motionless while 3 adults pressed close, sharing body heat that his scanner showed dropping steadily. They were dying. David slid down the canyon wall, using his suit's magnetic grips. The nearest adult swung its massive head toward him, eyes like molten gold fixing on this tiny intruder. A sound emerged from its throat, deep and harmonic, carrying warning and exhaustion in equal measure. "Easy," David said, knowing it understood nothing. He held up empty hands, then reached slowly for the emergency beacon on his belt. The device pulsed with heat, designed to mark locations in whiteout conditions. He set it down between himself and the dragons, then stepped back. The largest adult watched him for a long moment. Intelligence burned in those eyes, unmistakable and profound. It looked at the beacon, then at David, then at its dying family. The dragon reached out one clawed foot and pulled the beacon closer. Heat washed over the huddled group. The juvenile stirred slightly. David's heart hammered. First contact protocols existed for situations like this, pages of regulations about contamination and interference. He had memorized them during training, back when he cared about following every rule. That was before his entire research team died in an avalanche while he survived by pure chance. Before survivors, guilt became his constant companion. Before he learned that some rules mattered less than doing what was right. "There are caves," David said, pulling up his holomap. He pointed toward a network of tunnels 300 meters east. "Geothermal vents, warm, safe." The dragon tilted its head, processing. It made another sound, different this time, and the other adults responded. Conversation, David realized. They were discussing options. One of the adults struggled to its feet, revealing frostbitten wings that barely functioned. Female, David guessed from the slightly smaller crest. She moved to the juvenile and nudged it gently. The young one whimpered but did not rise. The third adult, battle-scarred and clearly aggressive, fixed David with a glare that needed no translation. It positioned itself between the human and the juvenile, protective despite its own deteriorating condition. The largest dragon made a decision. It vocalized sharply, a command that the others acknowledged. Then it looked at David and made a gesture with its head that any species would recognize. "Follow me." "Other way," David said, pointing. "I follow you." The dragon understood. It bent down, allowing the female to climb onto its back, supporting her damaged wings. The aggressive one grabbed the juvenile by the scruff of its neck, lifting with visible effort. Together, they began moving toward the caves David had indicated. The journey was brutal. Wind speeds exceeded 80 kilometers per hour. Snow fell in sheets so thick that David's suit system struggled to maintain navigation locks. The dragons moved slowly, fighting for every meter. David walked alongside them, matching their pace. His suit temperature warnings flashed increasingly urgent messages. He silenced them. If these creatures could push forward while dying, he could manage discomfort. The aggressive dragon stumbled. Its precious burden slipped. David reacted on instinct, diving forward to cushion the juvenile's fall with his own body. The impact drove air from his lungs. The young dragon's weight exceeded 200 kilos easily. The aggressive adult roared, lunging toward David. The largest dragon blocked it, making sounds that were clearly rebuke. A tense moment passed. Then the aggressive one backed down, making a sound that might have been acknowledgement or apology. David struggled out from under the juvenile. "We need to move faster." As if understanding his urgency, the largest dragon knelt. It gestured with its head toward its back. David stared. It wanted him to ride. "You're barely standing yourself," David protested. The dragon insisted, lowering further. David climbed on, gripping the ridge of its spine. The creature rose smoothly despite its burden, and suddenly they were moving at double speed. The aggressive dragon followed, carrying the juvenile with renewed determination. The cave entrance appeared through the storm like salvation. David's scanner confirmed geothermal activity inside, temperature readings that meant survival. The dragons hurried forward, squeezing through an opening that was barely adequate for their size. Inside, warmth embraced them, not comfortable but survivable. The dragons collapsed immediately, forming a protective circle around the juvenile. Steam rose from their scales as ice began melting. David activated his portable fusion lamp, filling the cave with steady light. He pulled out his medical kit, knowing it was designed for humans, but hopping some basics would translate. The largest dragon watched him approach the juvenile. It did not stop him. David examined the young one's leg, finding it twisted at an unnatural angle. Broken. He had splinting materials, antiseptic, and pain medication that might work across species barriers if he calculated dosages correctly. "This will hurt," he said, meeting the juvenile's golden eyes, "but it will help." He worked carefully, setting the bone as best he could while the young dragon whimpered. The adults surrounded them, watching every movement. When David injected diluted pain medication, the aggressive dragon hissed, but the largest one stopped it again. Minutes passed. The juvenile's breathing steadied. Its eyes, which had been glazed with pain, focused more clearly. David sat back, exhausted. His suit's power reserves had dropped to 30%. His emergency supplies were depleted. The storm outside showed no signs of stopping. He should contact the outpost, report his situation, request extraction. Instead, he pulled out a ration bar and broke it into pieces. He offered them to the dragons. The largest one sniffed the food, then carefully took a piece. It chewed experimentally, then swallowed. Not ideal nutrition for a dragon, probably, but calories were calories. The others followed its lead. Even the aggressive one accepted food from David's hand, though its eyes never stopped evaluating this strange creature who had led them to safety. David leaned against the cave wall, watching his unlikely companions. They were magnificent and terrifying, alien yet somehow familiar. They grieved, he could see that now, not just from physical exhaustion but from some deeper loss that weighed on them like the storm outside. He recognized that burden. He had carried it for 3 years. The largest dragon settled near him, close enough that David could feel heat radiating from its scales. It made a low sound, almost gentle. David reached out slowly and touched its shoulder. "We'll get through this," he said, "together." Outside, the wind howled. Inside, 5 beings from 2 different worlds shared warmth and the fragile beginning of trust. Morning arrived without sunrise. The storm continued its assault on Thyra's 7, turning day into perpetual twilight. David woke to find the juvenile dragon, Pip, as he had started thinking of the young one, watching him with curious eyes. The name felt right. Short, simple, and somehow fitting for a creature whose scales caught the lamp light like scattered diamonds. Pip chirped softly, a sound nothing like the deep harmonics of the adults. David checked his suit diagnostics, 18% power. Enough for maybe 6 more hours of life support if he rationed carefully. His emergency beacon had been broadcasting for 9 hours. No response from the outpost. The largest dragon, the one David privately called Cress for the battle scars crossing its body, stood near the cave entrance. It stared into the white chaos outside with the posture of someone making difficult calculations. David approached carefully. "We cannot travel yet, maybe tomorrow." Cress turned its massive head. Those golden eyes studied David with an intensity that suggested real comprehension. The dragon made a series of sounds, musical and complex. David's universal translator, clipped to his belt, crackled to life. Nest, empty, flight, broken. The words were fragments, barely coherent. The device was designed for documented species, not entirely new ones, but meaning emerged through the gaps. "You lost someone," David said quietly, "before the storm." Cress's eyes widened slightly. Confirmation. The dragon moved to where Pip lay and gently touched the juvenile's head with its snout. Then it looked at the empty space beside Pip and made a sound that transcended species barriers. Grief, pure and devastating. The female dragon, the one with frostbitten wings David thought of as Lyra for her graceful movements despite injury, joined Cress. She added her voice to his, harmonizing in what was clearly a ritual. The aggressive male, Soren, completed the trio. Their combined sound filled the cave, resonant and haunting. Pip joined weakly, a fourth voice in the chorus. David's translator caught fragments. "Sister, sky, lost, remember." They had lost a child, another juvenile, Pip's sibling. David's throat tightened. He understood this pain intimately. The empty spaces left by those who should still be there. The guilt of surviving when others did not. When the dragons finished their song, silence fell heavy. Lyra moved to a corner and began scratching patterns into the stone wall with her claws. Deliberate marks, purposeful. A memorial, David realized. He pulled out his own knife and approached a section of wall. Carefully, he carved 5 names: Peterson, Williams, Rodriguez, Chen, Akafer, his team, dead 3 years but never forgotten. Cress watched this, head tilted in what might have been understanding. The dragon moved beside David and carved a single symbol, complex and beautiful. A name in a language David could not read but whose meaning was clear. Astra. That had been the lost juvenile's name. They worked in silence, human and dragon creating remembrance in stone. When they finished, Cress did something unexpected. It touched its forehead gently to David's, a gesture of shared experience. Soren growled from across the cave. The aggressive dragon had been watching this exchange with obvious displeasure. It stalked forward, positioning itself between David and Cress, and made sounds that needed no translation. Challenge. Mistrust. Soren, stop. The translator caught Cress's rebuke clearly. Language matrices were building, patterns emerging. But Soren would not stop. It moved closer to David, looming, radiating hostility. David stood his ground, knowing that running would trigger a predator's instinct. He met Soren's eyes, keeping his posture non-threatening but not submissive. "I understand you do not trust me," David said steadily. "You blame yourself for what happened to Astra. You think accepting my help dishonors her memory." The translator struggled with the concepts, but Soren's reaction suggested enough got through. The dragon's eyes widened. Its aggressive posture faltered. "I blamed myself too," David continued. "My team died because I chose the wrong route. I survived because I lagged behind, checking readings. Every day I wonder if my decisions killed them." Soren made a sound, softer now. Confused, the translator offered how. "No. Because grief looks the same everywhere," David said, "even across species." Lyra approached, inserting herself gently between Soren and David. She made calming sounds, touching Soren's shoulder with her wing. Brothers, David guessed. The family dynamics were becoming clearer. Soren backed down but did not leave. It settled nearby, watching David with less hostility and more confusion. Progress, small but real. David checked his supplies. 3 ration bars remained. His water recycler was functioning, so hydration was not an immediate concern. But food would become critical soon. The dragons clearly needed more than his rations could provide. "What do you eat?" he asked, looking at Cress. The dragon considered the question. It moved to the cave entrance and sniffed the air. Then it made a sound the translator rendered as ice swimmers, deep dwellers, gone now. Local fauna, driven to shelter by the storm. David's scanner confirmed no large life signs within a kilometer. The dragons were starving. David made a decision. "I have emergency protocols. If I transmit a specific code, the outpost will send supplies." He looked at the dragons seriously. "But they will also send people. They will want to study you, contain you." Cress understood. Cage. Possibly. The dragon's crest flared in what David now recognized as agitation. No cage. Death before cage. David had suspected this. "Then we must be very careful. I will request only supplies, claim equipment failure. It might buy us time." He activated his communicator, crafting a message that was technically truthful but deliberately vague. "Unit 7 to base. Storm damage to power systems. Requesting supply drop, coordinates attached. No personnel needed. Repeat, no personnel." Static crackled, then a voice responded. "Unit 7 base confirms supply drop. ETA 14 hours. Shelter in place. Base out." 14 hours. The storm might break by then. The dragons might be strong enough to travel. Might. Pip made a distressed sound. David hurried over to find the juvenile shivering despite the geothermal warmth. Fever, he realized. The broken leg was infected or the stress had triggered illness. Dragon physiology was beyond his medical knowledge. Lyra pushed David aside gently and began licking Pip's scales. A cleaning behavior, clearly, but also something more. The saliva seemed to have properties that made Pip relax. Medicinal, perhaps. David watched, fascinated. Then he noticed Lyra's wings trembling. The frostbite was worse than he had thought, black tissue spreading. "Let me see," he said, approaching carefully. Lyra hesitated but allowed it. David examined the wing membrane. Severe damage, necrotic in places. Without treatment, she might lose function permanently. His medical kit contained dermal regenerator gel designed for human frostbite. Dragon biology was different, but the principles might transfer. He looked at Lyra. "This might help, or it might do nothing. I do not know." Lyra made a sound. The translator offered try. David applied the gel carefully, watching for adverse reactions. Lyra hissed once, then settled. Minutes passed. The black tissue did not spread further, perhaps even receded slightly. Cress watched this treatment with obvious relief. It approached David and made a complex series of sounds. The translator struggled but produced why, help, strangers. David thought about that question. Why had he risked everything for these creatures? Why was he still here instead of safe at the outpost? "Because no one should grieve alone," he said finally. "Because I know what it means to lose family. Because if I had died in that avalanche, I would have wanted someone to help my team, even if they survived without me." Cress absorbed this. Then it did something remarkable. It reached into a pouch David had not noticed before and pulled out a small object. Crystalline, beautiful, glowing faintly with internal light. The dragon placed the crystal in David's hand. Memory stone, Astra's, you, keep safe. David stared at the precious object. They were trusting him with their most treasured possession, a memorial to their lost child. The weight of that trust settled over him. I will guard it with my life, he promised. Outside, the wind began to ease slightly. The worst of the storm was passing. Tomorrow would bring decisions, danger, and the possibility of escape. But tonight, in this cave lit by human fusion and dragon warmth, two species shared their grief and found unexpected kinship. The storm broke near dawn, leaving a landscape transformed. Snow lay in drifts higher than David's head, sculpted by wind into alien geometries. The sky above showed patches of Thyras 7's pale blue atmosphere, though darker clouds promised more weather soon. David stood at the cave entrance, calculating distances and dangers. The outpost was 12 kilometers northeast. The dragon nesting grounds, based on his long-range scans and Cress's descriptions, were approximately 80 kilometers south. Both destinations required travel across exposed terrain. Behind him, the dragon stirred. Pip was stronger this morning, attempting to stand on the splinted leg. Lyra's wings showed continued improvement, the dermal gel working better than David had dared hope. Soren remained watchful and suspicious, but no longer openly hostile. Cress moved among them, clearly assessing their readiness to travel. David's communicator chirped. Unit 7 base. Supply drop inbound, ETA 40 minutes. Confirm position. Position confirmed, David replied, standing by. He turned to find Cress beside him. The dragon had moved with surprising stealth for something so massive. Flying box comes. Yes, food, medicine, power cells, but after, David hesitated. They will ask questions. They will want to know why I needed so much. Cress's crest flattened in concern. Then we go, before questions. You are not strong enough. Pip cannot fly yet. The journey to your nesting grounds. We die trying, Cress interrupted. Or die in cages, same choice. David wanted to argue, but he understood the logic. Freedom mattered more than safety to these beings. He had made similar choices himself, abandoning a promising career rather than compromise his principles after his team's death. There might be another way, he said slowly. What if I came with you? My transport has medical equipment, supplies, navigation systems. I could help ensure you reach home safely. Soren hissed from across the cave. The translator caught his objection clearly. No, human stays, human tells others, we die anyway. I would not tell anyone, David said, meeting Soren's glare. I would be abandoning my post, breaking my contract. They would not trust my reports after that. Lyra made a questioning sound. Why? Why break promises for strangers? David looked at each of them in turn. Because you are not strangers anymore. Because I have spent 3 years existing but not living. Because helping you reach home means something, and I need my life to mean something again. Cress studied him for a long moment. Then the dragon made a decision. You come, we accept. Soren started to protest, but Cress silenced him with a sharp sound. A tense exchange followed, dragon voices rising and falling in harmonics that David's translator could not fully process. Family argument, clearly. Soren wanted to reject the human's help. Cress insisted on accepting it. Lyra mediated between them. Pip settled the debate. The juvenile limped over to David and leaned against him, making small, contented sounds. The gesture spoke volumes. Trust, simple and complete. Soren made a frustrated sound but stopped arguing. He moved to the memorial wall and traced Astra's symbol with one claw. If human betrays, I kill him. Fair, David agreed. The supply drop arrived exactly on schedule, a cargo drone descending through the thinning clouds. David guided it down to a clearing near the caves. The containers held everything he had requested and more. Food rations, medical supplies, power cells, and a replacement atmospheric suit. He worked quickly. loading what they needed onto his small transport vehicle. The dragons watched with interest, particularly when he activated the craft's interior heating and medical bay. "This will carry Pip and Lyra," he explained. "Cress and Soren can fly alongside when needed or rest when tired. It will be slow but safer than pushing too hard." Cress inspected the transport thoroughly. Small, tight. Yes, but warm and equipped with medical systems. Pip's leg needs monitoring. Lyra's wings need continued treatment. The dragon accepted this logic. "When we leave." David checked weather projections. Another storm was building, but they had perhaps 6 hours of clear conditions. Now, before base calls again. They prepared quickly. David loaded supplies while the dragons performed a ritual around the memorial wall, harmonizing in farewell to this temporary shelter. Then Pip and Lyra boarded the transport, settling awkwardly into spaces designed for cargo, not living creatures. David took the pilot seat and activated systems. "Hold steady. First jump will feel strange." The transport lifted smoothly, anti-gravity engines humming. Pip squeaked an alarm, but Lyra made soothing sounds. Outside, Cress and Soren launched themselves skyward, wings catching the cold air. They flew south. The journey was immediately treacherous. Wind shear buffeted the transport, forcing David to fight for control. Cress and Soren struggled too, their weakened states showing in unsteady flight patterns. Twice David had to descend and let them rest on the transport's roof, clinging to maintenance rails while the vehicle bore their weight. During one rest period, David asked the question that had been bothering him. "Why did you come to Thyra's 7? This is not your world." Cress made a sound the translator rendered as complex emotion. "Death migration, old tradition. When family loses child, parents seek hardest place, die there or become strong enough to continue." "You came here to die." David felt cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Came here to test ourselves," Lyra corrected. "If we survived, we were worthy to return to flock. If not," she made a gesture that meant acceptance. "That is insane," David said bluntly. Soren growled agreement. "I told them, stupid tradition. Astra would want us to live, not seek death." "But tradition says," Cress began. "Tradition can be wrong," David interrupted. "My people had similar practices once. Ritual suicide to preserve honor. We learned better. We learned that surviving and honoring the dead are not opposites." The dragons fell silent, considering this. Finally, Cress spoke. "Perhaps, but we are here now. We complete journey, return to flock. That is what matters." They flew on. Hours passed. David's navigation systems tracked their progress across the frozen wilderness. 70 kilometers remaining, 60, 50. Then disaster struck. A predator erupted from a snowbank below, something massive with 6 legs and jaws that could swallow the transport whole. It leaped impossible heights, reaching for Soren, who flew lowest. Soren dodged, but barely. The creature's claws raked his tail, drawing blood. The dragon roared and wheeled, breathing a stream of superheated air that made the predator recoil. "Get higher," David shouted, pushing the transport's engines to maximum. But more predators appeared, a pack hunting together. They had been tracking the dragons, waiting for an opportunity. Now they attacked in coordinated strikes. Cress dove to defend Soren, breathing his own fire. The predators scattered but regrouped quickly. These were apex hunters, unafraid even of dragons. David made a split-second decision. He activated the transport's emergency protocols, routing all power to the defensive shields and weapons systems. Energy barriers flared to life around the vehicle. A small plasma cannon extended from the roof. "Get behind me," he ordered. The dragons obeyed, forming up behind the shielded transport. David laid down suppressing fire, plasma bolts scorching the snow and driving the predators back. But they kept coming, driven by hunger and instinct. One leaped onto the transport's hood. Its weight nearly drove them from the sky. Inside, Pip screamed. Lyra positioned herself protectively over the juvenile. David fought the controls with one hand and fired the plasma cannon with the other. The predator on the hood died, sliding off in a smoking heap, but two more took its place. Then Soren did something unexpected. He landed on the transport's roof and roared a challenge that shook the air. The sound carried harmonics that made even David's bones vibrate, a war cry, ancient and terrible. The predators hesitated. In that moment, Cress joined his voice to Soren's, then Lyra, and finally even Pip. 4 dragons singing battle song, harmonizing in defiance. The predators broke and ran. Silence fell, broken only by heavy breathing and the transport's laboring engines. David checked for damage. Shields depleted, hulls scored but intact, engines overheated but functional. "Everyone alive?" he asked. Affirmatives came from all 4 dragons. Soren climbed down from the roof and pressed his face to the transport's window, looking at David. The translator caught a single word: "Thanks." David nodded. "We protect each other. That is what family does." Soren's eyes widened at the word family. He made no response, but something in his posture changed. Acceptance, perhaps, or the beginning of it. They flew on through the growing darkness, leaving the predators and the battlefield behind. Ahead, somewhere in the frozen south, home waited. The dragon nesting grounds appeared at sunset, carved into cliffs that rose from the ice like ancient monuments. Hundreds of caves dotted the stone faces, each entrance marked with symbols David recognized from Astra's memorial. A civilization, old and proud. But something was wrong. The caves should have been alive with activity, dragons coming and going. Instead, silence reigned. The nesting grounds seemed abandoned. Cress made a sound of distress. Empty, everyone gone. David scanned with his instruments. Life signs registered deeper in the cliff network, but faint and few. Not everyone, some remain. They landed at the main entrance, a massive opening carved with elaborate designs. As soon as the transport touched down, dragons emerged from the shadows. 6 of them, all elderly, judging by their faded scales and careful movements. The eldest approached Cress, making sounds of surprise and relief. The translator caught fragments. Thought lost, death migration, returned. Cress bowed his head respectfully. "We return, Elder Quinn, changed but alive." Elder Quinn's eyes traveled over the group, counting. 4 departed, 4 return, but she looked at the empty space where a 5th dragon should be. Understanding dawned. The young one. "Astra flies with ancestors now," Lyra said quietly. The elders made sounds of mourning, a harmony that echoed through the cliffs. David felt the weight of their grief, amplified by his own memories. Every culture had rituals for loss. Every species understood this pain. Then Elder Quinn noticed David and the transport. Her eyes widened. "Human, here, Cress, explain." Cress did, speaking rapidly in dragon tongue while the translator struggled to keep pace. He told of the storm, the caves, David's intervention. He showed them Pip's splinted leg and Lyra's healing wings. He explained the journey home and the battle with predators. The elders listened in stunned silence. When Cress finished, Elder Quinn approached David slowly. She studied him with eyes that had seen centuries. "You saved our young ones," she said, the translator rendering her words clearly. "Why?" David had answered this question before, but the words still felt inadequate. Because it was right, because they needed help. "Humans and dragons have not spoken in 300 years, Elder Quinn said. "Not since the war. You risk much by being here." David had not known about a war. That information had not been in any colonial database. "I risk what I choose to risk. They are my friends." Soren stepped forward. "He speaks truth, Elder. Human fought for us, bled for us, family." The word hung in the air. The elders exchanged glances, communicating in ways David could not follow. Finally, Elder Quinn nodded. Then you are welcome, David Reed, guest friend of the Dragon clans. She made a formal gesture that was clearly ceremonial. Come, we must talk of many things. They gathered in a great chamber deep within the cliffs. A fire burned in the center, not fueled by wood but by some chemical process that produced clean heat and light. The elders settled in a circle, with Cress's family and David among them. The nesting grounds are empty because most have gone to the gathering, Elder Quinn explained. Every 50 years, all dragon clans meet to share knowledge and renew bonds. It happens now, 300 kilometers east. Why did you not go? Cress asked. We are too old for such journeys. We remain as guardians, tenders of the sacred spaces. Elder Quinn's expression grew sad, and as witnesses to those who do not return from death migrations. The chamber fell silent. David understood. These elders stayed behind to remember the dead, to ensure that those lost to grief were not forgotten. How many? He asked quietly. This year, 7 families attempted death migrations. 3 returned before departure, 4 left. Elder Quinn looked at Cress. You are the first to return once departed, ever. The weight of that statement settled over them. Cress and his family had broken a pattern that had persisted for generations. They had survived what was meant to be unsurvivable. The tradition is wrong, David said firmly. Grief should not require death. Elder Quinn's crest flared. You speak boldly, human, about traditions older than your species. Age does not make a thing right, David countered. My people practiced slavery for thousands of years. That did not make it justified. The dragon stirred, uncertain. Elder Quinn regarded David with new interest. What would you suggest instead? Honor the dead by living well. Create memorials, yes, but not through suicide missions. Grieve together, heal together, continue together. David gestured to Cress's family. They are stronger now than when they left, not because they nearly died, but because they found reasons to survive. Pip chirped agreement. David is right. Astra would want us happy, not dead. Elder Quinn looked at the juvenile for a long moment. Then she did something unexpected. She laughed, a sound like distant thunder. A child shall lead them, as the old saying goes, perhaps across species too. She stood, moving to the chamber's wall where symbols covered every surface. Her claw traced specific patterns. These marked death migrations, thousands over centuries. Almost all ended in confirmed deaths or disappearances. She carved a new symbol beside them. This marks a change, the family that returned, the human who helped them, the breaking of a cycle. The other elders added their marks, each one a vote of agreement. Change was being written into dragon history, literally in stone. What happens now? David asked. Now we wait for the gathering to end. When our people return, we tell them of this. We debate, discuss, perhaps change traditions that need changing. Elder Quinn smiled at David. And you, human, what becomes of you? David had been avoiding that question. His contract was voided the moment he abandoned his post. Earth authorities would consider him a deserter. The corporate overlords who funded the Thyra's 7 colony would blacklist him. He had no job, no home, no future in human space. I do not know, he admitted. Cress moved beside him. You stay here with us, family. The other dragons voiced agreement, even Soren, who nodded firmly. Lyra pressed her head gently against David's shoulder. Pip wrapped his tail around David's legs. Elder Quinn watched this display with clear approval. It seems you have been adopted, David Reed. Will you accept? David looked at the dragons around him. They had become more than research subjects or aliens. They were friends, companions, the family he had lost years ago. With them, he had found purpose again. Yes, he said, I accept. The elders began a new harmony, welcoming song that filled the chamber with sound. David felt the vibrations in his chest, in his bones. Music that transcended language, carrying acceptance and belonging. Later, as the others settled to rest, David stood at the cliff entrance watching stars emerge. Cress joined him, massive and silent. "You gave up much for us," the dragon said. "I gained more than I lost," David replied honestly. "Still, we owe you debt beyond measure." David touched the memory stone Cress had given him, still safely stored in his suit. "No debt, just friendship. That is enough." Cress made a sound of contentment. They stood together in comfortable silence, human and dragon watching the same stars from a frozen moon neither called home, but both had found family. Tomorrow would bring challenges. The returning dragons would need convincing. Some would resist change. Politics would complicate everything. But tonight, David Reed felt something he had not experienced in 3 years: peace. The dragon gathering returned 3 weeks later, announced by wing beats that thundered across the frozen sky. Hundreds of dragons descended on the nesting grounds, filling the cliffs with color and sound. David watched from a sheltered alcove, suddenly aware of how alien he was among these magnificent beings. Cress had insisted he stay visible, not hide. "You are family, you stand with us." So David stood beside Cress's family as the crowds arrived, weathering the stares and shocked reactions. Most dragons had never seen a human before. Some hissed in alarm, others approached with curiosity. A massive dragon landed before them, scales like burnished copper, bearing scars that spoke of countless battles. Authority radiated from every movement. The crowd parted respectfully. "Cress," the newcomer said, voice like grinding stone, "reported dead on death migration, yet here you stand. Explain." "Commander Talai's," Cress replied, bowing his head. "Much has happened." Talai's eyes found David. "I see that, a human, here. Do you understand what you have done, bringing this creature to our sacred grounds?" David stepped forward before Cress could respond. "I am David Reed. I helped Cress and his family survive. I ask for guest right under ancient law." Silence fell. Even Talai's looked surprised. "You know our laws." "Elder Quinn taught me during the waiting period." David met the commander's gaze steadily. "I invoke them now." Talai's crest flared in what might have been amusement or anger. "Guest right requires 3 witnesses to vouch for your character and intent. Can you provide them?" "I can," Cress said immediately. "As can I," Elder Quinn called from the crowd. Soren stepped forward, surprising everyone. "And I vouch for him. He fought beside us, bled for us, saved us when he could have left us to die." Talai's regarded Soren with interest. "You were most vocal against human contact before death migration. What changed?" "I learned that honor exists beyond species," Soren said quietly. "That grief and love are universal. That family is chosen, not just born." Murmurs rippled through the gathered dragons. Talai's circled David slowly, evaluating. 3 witnesses. Guest right is granted, but this does not explain why a human is here or why Cress survived death migration. "That is a longer story," Cress said. "One the whole gathering should hear." The dragons assembled in the great chamber, hundreds packed together until the space overflowed. Those who could not fit listened from adjacent caverns, sound carrying through the stone. David stood at the center beside Cress's family, feeling the weight of countless eyes. Elder Quinn spoke first, establishing context. She told of finding the family returned, injured but alive. She told of David's role, of the journey home, of the battle with predators. Then Cress spoke. He told of Astra's death, of the grief that drove them to death migration. He told of the storm, the caves, the human who should have left them but stayed instead. His voice carried pain and gratitude in equal measure. Lyra continued the story, explaining David's care for Pip, his treatment of her wings, his willingness to abandon his own people to help strangers. Her words painted a picture of sacrifice driven by compassion. Pip spoke last, voice high and clear. David saved us, not because he had to, because he chose to, because he knew what grief feels like, because he is good. Simple words, but they resonated. Dragons shifted, reconsidering. David saw understanding dawning in many eyes. Then Soren did something remarkable. He approached David and bowed his head, a gesture of profound respect among dragons. I hated him at first, blamed him for our survival when Astra deserved to live. But he taught me that surviving is not betraying the dead, that honoring them means living well, not dying uselessly. He turned to face the gathering. Death migration is wrong. It has always been wrong. We lose families to grief when we should help them heal. David showed us another way. The chamber erupted in debate. Dragons argued in harmonics that made David's translator give up entirely. Some voices supported change. Others defended tradition. The discussion grew heated. Commander Taileyes raised one wing, demanding silence. Enough. This is matter for the Council of Elders, but first I would speak with the human. Taileyes approached David directly. You disrupted centuries of tradition. Whether for good or ill remains to be seen. What do you say in your defense? David took a breath. I say that tradition serves the living or it serves nothing. If your traditions cause unnecessary death, then they need examination. Not destruction, perhaps, but evolution. Bold words from one so young. I am not that young, David replied. I have seen death, I have carried grief, I know its weight. Taileyes studied him. What did you lose? 5 people, my research team. They died in an avalanche while I survived. For years I believed I should have died with them. Then I met Cress's family and realized that surviving to honor the dead is not cowardice. It is courage. The commander's expression softened almost imperceptibly. I lost my mate in the last Great War, 60 years ago. I nearly took death migration myself. What stopped you? Duty. My people needed leadership, but I envied those who chose the migration. I thought them braver than I. Taileyes looked at Cress. Perhaps I was wrong. Elder Quinn approached. The question before us is clear. Do we continue death migration as practiced, or do we evolve our response to grief? Some will resist any change, another elder said. Tradition provides comfort. False comfort, Soren interjected. How many families have we lost unnecessarily? How many children grew up without parents because of this practice? A younger dragon spoke up. My parents went on death migration when I was Pip's age. I grew up with elders, never knowing my birth family. If David's way had existed then, perhaps they would have lived. More voices joined, sharing similar stories. The tide was turning slowly but noticeably. David remained silent, letting the dragons debate among themselves. This was their decision to make. Finally, Commander Taileyes spoke. I propose a trial period. For the next 10 years, families experiencing loss will be offered choice. Traditional death migration or a new path. Mentorship from those who have survived grief. Community support. Memorial building that honors the dead without requiring death of the living. And the human, someone asked. David Reed stays as honored guest, Taileyes declared. He will help establish these new practices, share his people's methods of grief counseling and trauma recovery, serve as bridge between our species. Elder Quinn nodded approval, all in favor. The harmonics of agreement filled the chamber, overwhelming the few dissenting voices. Change had been voted into existence. Later, as celebrations began, David found himself surrounded by dragons asking questions. How did humans handle grief? What rituals helped? Could he teach them? He answered as best he could, sharing practices from Earth cultures, memorials that celebrated life rather than dwelling on death, support groups where the bereaved could share experiences, therapeutic techniques for processing trauma. Pip stayed close, basking in the attention. The juvenile had become something of a celebrity, the child who survived death migration and helped change dragon society. Cress found David during a quiet moment. "You have given us great gift." "You gave me one first," David replied. "Purpose, family, a reason to live instead of just existing." The dragon touched his forehead to David's, the gesture now familiar and meaningful. "Partners in grief, partners in healing." "Always," David agreed. As night fell, dragons gathered around the great fire to sing. Traditional mourning songs, yes, but also songs of celebration and hope. David listened to the harmonies, complex and beautiful, and felt truly at home for the first time in years. Soren approached and sat beside him, no longer hostile but companionable. "You changed everything, human." "We changed everything together," David corrected. "All of us." Soren made a sound of agreement. Then, hesitantly, he asked, "Will you teach me about your team, the ones you lost? I would like to understand your grief better." David felt tears prick his eyes. "I would like that." They talked long into the night, sharing stories of the dead, keeping memories alive through words. Around them, dragons did the same, adapting old traditions into new forms. Change had come to the nesting grounds, not through force or demand, but through example, compassion, and the willingness to imagine different futures. 6 months passed like pages turning in a book written in fire and ice. David settled into his new life among the dragons, learning their language beyond what translators could provide, understanding their culture from the inside. The nesting grounds transformed around him as dragons embraced new approaches to grief. Memorial gardens replaced death migration departure points. Dragons carved stories of the lost into stone walls, celebrating their lives rather than marking their deaths. Support circles formed where the bereaved could gather and share, finding comfort in community. Not everyone approved. A faction led by a dragon named Vortes insisted that old ways should remain unquestioned. They viewed David with suspicion, seeing him as corruption of dragon purity. But they were outnumbered and growing fewer as success stories accumulated. David stood in one such memorial garden, tending to bioluminescent plants that thrived in the cold. These flowers, native to Thyra's 7, glowed in colors that reminded him of Astra's scales. Cress had helped him transplant them here, creating a living tribute that would persist through generations. Pip landed beside him, leg fully healed now, flight strong and confident. The juvenile had grown significantly, scales deepening in color, voice dropping to more adult registers. But Pip's spirit remained bright and curious. "David, the council wants to see you," Pip announced. "Something about human visitors." David's stomach tightened. He had known this day would come. Earth authorities would eventually track him down, questions would be asked, consequences would follow. He found the council assembled in the great chamber, but they were not alone. 3 humans stood with them, wearing diplomatic insignia David recognized, official representatives from the colonial administration. The lead diplomat, a woman named Dr. Sarah Kim, stepped forward. "David Reed, you are a difficult man to find." "I was not hiding," David replied. "I simply found a new home." "You violated your contract, abandoned your post, and disappeared with valuable colonial equipment." Dr. Kim's tone was professional but cold. "Those are serious offenses." "I saved lives. I prevented a tragedy. I built a bridge between species who have not communicated in 3 centuries. David met her gaze steadily. "I would make the same choices again." Commander Taileyes moved to David's side, a gesture of protection. "David Reed is guest friend of the Dragon clans. He has our full support. Any attempt to remove him will be considered act of aggression." The diplomats exchanged glances. Dr. Kim softened slightly. "We are not here to arrest you, Mr. Reed. We are here to understand what you have achieved." Reports filtered back through colonial networks about human-dragon cooperation. The administration is interested in formalizing relations. David had not expected that. Formalizing how? An embassy, cultural exchange programs, scientific cooperation. Dr. Kim gestured to her companions. The dragons possess knowledge and capabilities we lack. In return, we can offer technologies and resources that might benefit them. But we need someone who understands both species, someone who has already proven they can bridge the gap. You want me to be an ambassador, David realized. We want to offer you that position, yes. Full reinstatement, cleared record, and official status. Dr. Kim produced a data pad. The terms are generous. You would maintain residence here while facilitating communications between our peoples. David looked at Cress, at the gathered elders, at Pip, who watched with wide eyes. This is not my decision alone. The dragons must agree. Commander Taileye spoke after conferring with other council members. We accept this arrangement with conditions. David remains autonomous, not controlled by human authorities. Decisions about dragon interactions with humans go through our council, not human bureaucrats, and military vessels remain prohibited from our territories. Agreed, Dr. Kim said without hesitation. We want partnership, not domination. The war taught our ancestors that forcing cooperation never works. The treaty was drafted over 3 days of intense negotiations. David found himself translating not just words but concepts, helping both sides understand cultural contexts and values. It was exhausting work but deeply satisfying. On the 4th day, the agreement was finalized. Humans and dragons would establish diplomatic relations, beginning with a small embassy near the nesting grounds. Trade would be limited initially, focusing on medical and technological exchanges. Most importantly, the treaty recognized dragon sovereignty and guaranteed non-interference in internal affairs. As the human delegation prepared to depart, Dr. Kim approached David privately. You gave up everything for them. Career, home, future among your own kind. Was it worth it? David thought about that question. He thought about Cress's family, about the memorial gardens, about dragons learning to grieve without dying. He thought about Pip's laughter and Soren's hard-won trust. I did not give up anything, he said finally. I traded one life for a better one. Yes, it was worth it. After the humans left, celebrations began. The treaty was a victory, recognition of dragon culture, and autonomy on terms they could accept. David found himself swept up in festivities that lasted 3 days, dancing with dragons who taught him their steps, sharing meals prepared in ways that honored both species' traditions. Lyra approached him during a quiet moment. You could have returned to your people, taken the easy path. Why stay? This is my people now, David said simply. You, Cress, Pip, Soren, the elders, everyone here. Family is not about biology. It is about choice and commitment. Lyra touched her forehead to his, the gesture of deep affection. We are honored by your choice. Weeks later, David stood at Astra's memorial with Cress's family. They had established a new tradition, visiting on the anniversary of her death not to mourn but to remember and celebrate. Other families joined them, sharing stories of their own lost loved ones. Pip, nearly adult now, spoke of his sister. Astra loved flying through storms. She said the rain made the world smell new. The young dragon smiled. I fly through storms now and think of her. It makes me happy instead of sad. Soren added his memory. She was brave, fearless. When the predator attacked, she put herself between it and Pip, a warrior's death, honorable and clean. Lyra spoke of teaching Astra to hunt, of watching her succeed on her first solo flight, of the pride she felt as a mother. Tears flowed, but also laughter at remembered joy. Cress looked at David. Your turn, friend. David had not known Astra, but he knew her through their grief and recovery. I know Astra through the family she left behind, through Pip's courage and Soren's loyalty and Lyra's strength and Cress's wisdom. She shaped all of you, and through you, She shaped me. I am better for having known her impact, even indirectly. They harmonized together, the song they had created to honor Astra's memory. David added his voice, human tones blending with dragon harmonics in something new and beautiful. Later, as sunset painted the ice in shades of gold and purple, David sat with Cress overlooking the nesting grounds. Construction had begun on the human embassy, a small structure designed to blend with dragon architecture. In the valleys below, young dragons practiced flight while their parents watched protectively. "Thank you," Cress said quietly, "for everything." "Thank you for finding me in that storm," David replied, "for giving me purpose again." "We found each other," Cress corrected. "Two lost souls in a blizzard learning to be found." David smiled. It was true. He had been as lost as they were, wandering through grief with no direction. The storm had brought them together, and together they had found their way home. Pip glided down and landed between them, still unsteady but improving daily. "David, will you teach me more Earth languages? Soren says I should learn if I want to be diplomat someday." "Diplomat?" David raised his eyebrows. "Why not?" Pip's eyes sparkled with ambition. "You bridge two species, I can too. I want to help build something new." Cress made a sound of pride. "My child, the peacemaker, Astra would be proud." They sat together as stars emerged, human and dragons watching the same sky from a frozen moon that had become home. Around them, the nesting grounds hummed with life, with hope, with the sound of cultures learning to understand each other. David thought about the avalanche that had killed his team, about the years of grief that followed, about the storm that had changed everything. Tragedy had led him here to this moment, to this family. The pain of loss had never disappeared, but it had transformed into something bearable, even meaningful. He reached into his pocket and pulled out Astra's memory stone, still glowing softly. He had carried it for 6 months, a reminder of what they had survived and why it mattered. "I think it is time to return this to you," he said, offering it to Cress. The dragon shook his head. "No, you earned the right to carry it. You honored her memory by saving her family. Keep it, as symbol of what we built together." David closed his hand around the stone, feeling its warmth. "Then I will guard it always, just as I will guard our friendship." "Our family," Cress corrected gently. "Our family," David agreed. Above them, dragons wheeled through the darkening sky, their scales catching starlight. Below, the memorial gardens glowed with bioluminescent flowers. And in the caves, stories were being carved into stone, stories of loss and love and the bridges built between species by those brave enough to reach across the darkness. David Reed, human xenobiologist turned dragon ambassador, looked at his unlikely family and smiled. He had come to this frozen moon expecting isolation and found instead connection. He had arrived broken and been made whole. He had lost everything and gained more than he could have imagined. The storm had passed long ago, but its legacy remained. In memorial gardens and support circles, in treaties and friendships, in the quiet understanding that grief was universal, but so was the capacity for healing. As night deepened and the cold intensified, David felt only warmth. The warmth of Cress beside him, of Pip's excited chatter, of belonging to something larger than himself. He had survived the blizzard and found home on the other side. And that, he thought, was enough. More than enough, it was everything.